Very, very good to see all of you here this morning, especially as was mentioned, all of our visitors. We are so thankful for your presence with us. We're thankful to be here together. We've made it. It's the 52nd Sunday of 2025. We've made it to the end of another year. And over the course of this year, we have shared lessons talking about being servants and learning more about how God sees that. What are we talking about when we say, make me a servant? What is it that God has in mind when we are asking Him that? You gotta be very careful sometimes. You ask somebody to make something for you, and if you're talking about two different things, the result may not be what you desired. What is it that we're asking God to make us? And then we talked more about how that shapes us in the church, amongst one another, and also how it shapes us in the world and the way that we serve God in these various aspects. We spent a whole year talking about that, and as I did last year, I want to begin shaping our minds for the coming year by introducing a topic that we'll be talking about throughout each month in 2026. Before I do that, let me ask you to think about this question. When you think of the Exodus, what comes to mind? What are the sort of thoughts, the imagery, the pictures that come to mind when you reflect on the Exodus? Maybe it's the plagues, or the Red Sea crossing. Maybe it's Sinai and the peals of thunder and lightning. Maybe it's a golden calf. What is it that comes to your mind when you think of the book of Exodus? I want you for just a moment to imagine you're not a 21st century American being asked about Exodus. I want you to imagine for a moment that you've been transported back to the 15th century BC. You're standing in the heart of Egypt. The Nile flows, and on it is carried lavish feasts and markets and color and life. It's a society that is thriving. It's bustling. You look around, you see colossal temples that gleam in the sunlight. They have been specifically designed to almost radiate and glow throughout the day. Priests perform rites to gods whose names and whose images you know and you have seen everywhere you look across the empire. But beyond the grandeur of Egypt, in the restless sun, are the children of Israel, toiling in silence and in sorrow, backs bent and beaten under heavy burdens. The book of Exodus is a picture of glory and suffering side by side coexisting. It is the kingdom that is radiant with power and the people who are crying in chains. There's a stark contrast. And in that contrast, a question echoes out. And it's what I think about when I think about the Exodus. Is God really who He said He is? Is God going to accomplish what He said He would accomplish? The question that must have been on the minds of all the Israelites in that day is God faithful to the promises He made long ago? Generations have passed since the time when God said to Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation, I'm going to give you land, and through you I'm going to bless the entire world. Now, these many years later, the Israelites living in slavery, it would appear as if God had abandoned them. But before God stretches out His hand and acts in oppression and an attack against Egypt, He has to deal with this question that must be in their mind. Can we trust this God? That is a question that is sown throughout the book of Exodus. In chapter 5, verse 2, Pharaoh is going to ask that question. Who is Yahweh that I should hear His voice and obey? God's going to answer that not only to Pharaoh, but He's going to answer that to the children of Israel as well. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 5, He will say, the Egyptians are going to know that I am the Lord. He's going to give the 10 Commandments later on their journey. In Exodus 20, verse 2, He's going to say, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And what was just read for us in Exodus 34, verse 6 by Owen, the Lord God, compassionate and gracious and slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness and truth. Throughout the Exodus, we're going to see imagery and language that says, you need to know who I am. You need to remember who the Lord, the God of Israel, is. And one of the greatest descriptions of Him is His Hesed, the Hebrew word that He uses to describe Himself. We read it there in Exodus 34, verse 6. If you were reading in the New American Standard, it was called loving kindness. But if you were in the ESV, you might have read steadfast love. If you might have used another translation this morning, you might have heard things such as faithful love or loyal love. It is the idea of covenant faithfulness. I have made a covenant and I am the keeper of covenants. The purpose of Exodus was to reveal that what has happened was not because Israel has not been strong enough, or not because Israel has not been faithful enough, or not because Israel is not worthy enough, but what has happened is because God is a faithful God of covenant love. And as we go through the course of the year next year, we are going to try to understand more the covenant love of God and how it shapes us and what the Exodus means both in its context in history, but also in its application in our life today. To begin that, let's consider three ideas behind Yahweh's Hesed and how it should be understood today. Number one is the Hesed of Yahweh makes Him markedly different from the gods of Egypt. He is very, very different from the gods of Egypt. By the time we reach Exodus chapter 2, Israel has been enslaved in Egypt for centuries. And they remember the stories. They've probably told the stories passed down from generation to generation about how Abraham and Isaac and Jacob all had interactions and dealings with this great God. Their daily life, though, the reality that they experience day in and day out is telling them a very different story. They are oppressed. They are powerless. They are surrounded by a God that does not answer their prayers, that does not speak back. And yet, when they look around, they see all the different gods of Egypt who seemingly are listening to the Egyptians and giving them the things that they desire. Egypt has power. Egypt has protection. They have prosperity and stability. They must have something that we don't. They have gods that they can see. They have names that they can speak. They have temples that they can go to. They have priests that serve them. They have festivals that worship them. They appear effective because Egypt appears effective. But Yahweh, at this time, seems distant. Where is our God? He made all these promises to the Father. Where is He today? There is something that the Egyptian gods failed to be able to do. Maybe the Israelites don't see it yet, but it'll be the purpose of God to make it known. And that is, the Egyptian gods do not have the ability to make a covenant. They don't have the ability to engage in the life of the Egyptians in meaningful ways, to step out of their world and into theirs and build a relationship with them. They make no promises. And because they make no promises, they truly don't deliver anything. Everything is circumstance, and yet that stands in stark contrast to Yahweh. When Exodus tells us that God begins to act, it does not say that God suddenly got bored of the things that He was doing and decided, I'm going to start being involved again. I feel guilty for being away so long, and so I'm going to come back. There is no sense that God is acting on a whim here. Instead, in Exodus chapter 2, in verses 24 and 25, we read this: God heard their groaning. God remembered His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. Or your translation may say, He knew them. God's response to the Israelites and the situation that they're in doesn't flow out of convenience, doesn't flow out of a sense of having nothing better to do. God acts because He has made a commitment. We read that word that He remembered them, and we may get the notion that He must have forgot them. And then something happened that pricked His mind. Oh yeah, I've got promises that I've made. I probably should get around to keeping those. Instead, the notion is that the groaning and the oppression of His people brought them to the very forefront of His mind, which He now says that I'm going to do something about. I'm going to act in faithfulness to the very things that I have promised. We'll learn later that the reason for this time delay was not because God just didn't have anything better to do, but that He was acting still in mercy and grace towards a people who refused to know Him. The time that was allotted for the inhabitants of Canaan, where God is ultimately going to take these people, had not yet come. But throughout all of this, God never loses sight of the people that He has delivered to Egypt for their protection and promised to deliver to a place where they would live, where they would reside with Him. Every plague that will follow is going to be for the purpose of these two things. One, confronting the false gods of Egypt. We'll spend some time thinking about that, about how God goes to war against that which was false, that which did not have the ability to do the things that it had been assumed it could do. But maybe more so than that. The book of Exodus is God going to battle for His name in the eyes of His people. He's going to reassure the doubting hearts of Israel, showing both the world and the Israelites, I am not like the gods of the land. I am not like the gods of the world. I am not like the gods who cannot promise and ultimately will fail. I am a God who keeps my word. I am a God of faithfulness. I am the God of Hesed. And because of that, He acts out His Hesed. He acts out his loyal love. And Israel is not just delivered from the hands of Pharaoh. Something deeper begins to happen in the book of Exodus. God's covenant love begins to shape and transform them, reshaping how they understand suffering, reshaping how they understand hope, and reshaping how they understand the future. And that's really the second picture that we see, is that God's Hesed changes the people that He shows it to. People who experience the Hesed of God, they are transformed by it. His covenant faithfulness didn't just bring them out of Egypt. It shaped them in ways that are not always clearly seen in the book of Exodus, but become more clearly seen as they reflect back on it. And they will reflect back on it repeatedly. Throughout the minor prophets, throughout the days of Jeremiah and Israel, of Isaiah and Ezekiel and Daniel, throughout days which things again look bleak, they will look back to the Exodus and say, do you remember what God did? Do you remember how He showed Himself in mighty ways, calling on them to change the way that they were living by refocusing their eyes on the God who had been faithful to them. But one of the greatest pictures of that is if you were to read through the Psalms. As you read through the Psalms, you would repeatedly find these depictions of God in these ways. And what's beautiful about the Psalms is they're not very often written in a way that is different from this moment at the beginning of the Exodus. It's not like they're writing from a position that everything has gone perfectly. Our lives couldn't get better, and so we're going to talk about God. They are likewise, similarly, touched by pain. They write from places of fear and loss, injustice and despair. And over again, the Psalms will anchor themselves in these sorts of truth. They'll say, the steadfast love, the Hesed of Yahweh endures forever. Even when things aren't going good. Even when I don't see how they're ever going to go good again, it doesn't change this fact. Yahweh is faithful. It's important to see and say clearly. They are not saying God's faithfulness guarantees relief. They are not saying God's faithfulness means trouble disappears. They are not saying God's people are spared hardships because He is the God of Hesed. But throughout the Psalms, what we would read would be this lasting aspect of the people of God that goes beyond hardship, that goes beyond grief and pain. Hope. Because if God is faithful, we can have hope because the suffering of the world is not the final end. So when you read the Psalms and the psalmist says, "How long, O Lord?" They're expressing to you, I don't see an end. And then things aren't how I want it to be today. And I don't know if it's going to turn out well. But I know you. I know that because of the covenant love of God, He is assured to not abandon us, to not fail us, and His promises will still live on, no matter what's going on around us. That's what's beautiful about reading through the Psalms, is you discover that the Hesed of God never collapses. Our circumstances collapse around us all the time. Things don't go how we thought they would go. We get this picture of the right way that things are supposed to go, and we can think about very big ways that happens, but it happens in small ways as well. It happens in our marriages. When we get the notion that this is how that my spouse should respond to this, excuse me, to the situation that I'm in. I've had a really hard day, and I've come home, and I expect that my spouse is going to respond this way, and she doesn't, and circumstances collapse around me, and in even small moments, if we, like the psalmist, would look to the Lord, saying, I know things aren't how they want them to be right now. I know that my spouse is not responding how I wanted them to respond right now. And I don't know if that's going to get better or not. But I know this. I know that my God, that Yahweh, has not changed. He is the same God who rescued me, who delivered me. He is the same God who has led me. And He is eternally going to be faithful. And He is eternally going to do the things that He has promised to do. Despite how the people around me, despite how my co-workers, my family, despite how a world that repeatedly fails, my Yahweh, my God, He will not. This is what He does. And so as we think about that, I want you to reflect on how those sorts of thoughts will infiltrate the Exodus account. We will march out of Egypt into the wilderness and discover that what we thought about deliverance, being brought out of Egypt, what we thought that was going to look like, it's not as grand as what we thought. It's going to come and bring with it its own set of hardships. And then we're going to discover, because of that, great failures and people that we thought were strong and people that we thought were going to be different don't live up to the expectations that we placed on them. We'll come to the edge of Mount Sinai to a golden calf, and we'll discover the very things that God confronts in the book of Exodus don't always stay hidden. They don't always stay defeated. They rise back up and they are needed to be confronted again. And we'll even discover a very long road to a promised land of peace. and that the discipline of the Lord is necessary for us to come to see who He is. The story of the Exodus and the story of Israel is certainly not a story of flawless obedience, but it is a story of a people who come face to face with unfailing faithfulness. And the remarkable truth is, the story of Israel is not just something that is relegated to history and dates and maps. It becomes very, very real as a pattern, a picture of what God has done in the past and what God continues to do to this very day and what God has done in the lives of many of us. His Hesed, it shapes the faith of Israel and it continues to tell a story today. God in His covenant faithfulness leads us out of our own bondage, and it draws us to repentance, and it compels us to do something, to be shaped and changed by the loyal love that He has displayed. So the last thing that I would draw our minds to this morning is that His Hesed fuels who we are as Christians today. Again, I said the Exodus is not just a story, it's a pattern of how God saves. He's led each of us through our own Exodus account. The difference being, however, is that I'm not being delivered from some Pharaoh, some slave king that I've been enslaved to. For me, He had to purchase me and rescue me from something far closer than just some great power that's kind of off in obscurity. I was not enslaved to powers of the world. I was enslaved to my own lusts, my own desires, my own greed. We become captive to not Osiris and Iris, but to our own false gods of our own making. We craft our own images to worship. I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be viewed as successful. I wanted pleasure. I wanted to feel loved. I wanted the things that I want. The things that I wanted on my time frame and in my ways. It is interesting to me how we will strive after relationships and love. And God desires that. God has made us for that. He has made us to seek out those things, and yet we find a way to capture ourselves. When we decide, I'm going to receive that love, I'm going to have this relationship in the ways that seem right to me. And all of that happens because in some way, those things promise something that they can't truly deliver. And I think we would look honestly, we would discover they don't truly promise anything at all, but we tell ourselves, this is what this will give me. This will give me fulfillment. This relationship, this love, this comfort, this pleasure, this will make me feel more happy. This will fill the hole that's eating me up inside. This will give my life meaning, and this will give me purpose. But just like the gods of Egypt, they can't deliver. And they oftentimes fail. But yet, Yahweh, in His covenant faithfulness, in His loyal love, refused to leave us in that state. He acted out of faithfulness, not because we deserve it, but because He had made a promise that He intended to keep. The Apostle Paul would later write about this in Romans chapter 2, verse 4. He says, it's because of the kindness of God. You might draw that language. He's not using the word Hesed. He's speaking in Greek. But he draws that same sort of concept that the Old Testament writers would lean on, the loving kindness, the Hesed of Yahweh. He said it is because of the kindness of God that we are led to repentance. He's saying what prompted God to act and change the people around him in his day continues to work today. His goodness, his faithfulness, his loyal love is continuing to draw hearts out of slavery and into freedom. That's not only the reason why we come to him, it's the reason why we share him with the world around us. It's not because we've escaped all of our troubles. It's not because my life is so much better than yours. It's not because I've got everything figured out and you should be just like me. But because I have come to know a God that is unlike anything else you have ever seen. I have come to encounter a God who makes promises and then keeps them. I've come to encounter a God who truly is the embodiment of loyalty, of love, of kindness, of faith. We've come to know the God of Hesed. Now, if you go back for a moment as we conclude our time this morning, before the law was given at Sinai, in fact, before the waters of the Red Sea parted, before a single plague was pronounced on Egypt, God sent a messenger. He sent Moses. And he sent him saying, "Go tell Israel, I've heard your cries, I've heard your groaning. I remember, I have not forgotten the covenant, the promises that I have made, and I have a purpose. I see you, I notice you, I know the situation you're in, and I am going to act through leading you in deliverance." The same faithful God who sent Moses the deliverer continues to send a great deliverer today. Jesus doesn't merely lead us out of slavery. He leads us out of death and into life. I would ask you, as way of an invitation this morning, to reflect upon the Israelites as they heard that gospel message. Moses shows up and says, "Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the true God, not like the things of this world, but standing far above them, having created all of this, and who made a promise to our fathers, He has sent me," and said the promise is being fulfilled today. You're coming out of this land, and I'm going to take you to where He is. How grand a thought. Who's standing at the back of that line going, "I think I'd just rather stay where I'm at"? Where I'm beaten down every day, forced to do work that never ends and has not only is it never complete, but it has no fulfillment. It's not for me, it doesn't help me in any way, it only works to serve those who hate me. Certainly the people needed to have their confidence, their faith in Yahweh strengthened. And God's going to act in 10 powerful plagues to do that. But when somebody shows up and says, "This life of slavery gets to end," it ends today. Because God sent me to bring you to where He's at. I imagine most people want to be at the front of that line. Jesus came and said, "I didn't come because everybody's perfect. And there's this good group of people down here that just really have caught my attention. I came because you are lost. But I want to save you." And this day of slavery and all the problems that come with it, that's coming to an end. Because today, God has sent me the way, the truth, the life, so I can take you out of this to a place where you can be with Him. And nothing will ever threaten you again. If you're here this morning and you're reflecting on the Hesed of Yahweh, His covenant faithfulness, that He has come and acted, not because of who you are, but because who He is. and you're wondering, what do I do with that? That's the very message of the gospel. You surrender to it. You surrender to the things that He has said. When He says, I'm going to lead you out, just follow me. As we talked about a couple weeks ago, when He says that, follow me, He doesn't mean do everything that you see the people that are around me doing. Do everything and look like everybody else that is also claiming to be followers of me. What He means by that is, see who I am and seek to model yourself entirely after me. The great deliverer who gave His life and died on the cross so we could be set free. You can begin modeling that today by following that very same step. By coming to the waters of baptism, confessing that I believe Jesus is the Son of God, being washed of our sins, and having that old man of sin die in a watery grave, to be raised to newness of life. You are submitting to the God of faithfulness. Saying, I want to be like you. I want to be faithful. Maybe you've done that and you've discovered the journey was not what I thought it was going to be. Wasn't quite as grand. A lot of the troubles that I thought would be gone are somehow still here. And there's failures that I didn't expect. And the very things that God defeated in my life, they've come back up to haunt me. And they need to be defeated again. And it's a long road to the promised land. And I'm not sure that I've got the strength to carry on. What do we do then? We do exactly what the psalmist said. Lord, how long? I don't know if any of these things are going to change, but I know what will not change is you. And so I again come before you and throw myself at your feet, asking you to please deliver me, rescue me, bring me to where you are. If it is your will this morning to surrender yourself to the great God of faithfulness, if it is your will this morning, your desire to submit your life to the man that He has put before us to lead us to Him, if you desire to die with Christ and be raised a new man, or if you would desire to return to Him and begin again the journey that's leading to a place of rest. However we can assist you with it this morning, we would point you to the God of faithfulness. If we can help you with that, let's talk together as we stand and sing.